Hello, I'm Dr. Linda Grace Solis, Chair of AACOM's Council for Diversity and Equity, and today's session moderator. I'm delighted to welcome you to this inaugural fireside chat held in partnership with AAMC. Before we jump right into the discussion, I'd like to thank everyone at AACOM and AAMC who planned and organized this event. It definitely took a village, so thank you all for your contributions. Our panelists, 2 from AAMC member colleges and 2 from AACOM member colleges, will provide insight on best practices, tools, and resources needed to implement DEI initiatives, both at member colleges and at the national level. I would like to also note that we will have a Q&A session at the end of this webinar. So beginning in 1 hour, we will have a 15-minute Q&A session. Feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A chat down below on Zoom, or just hold them until we are ready for the Q&A. And we will have moderators watching the chat and the Q&A box as well, hopefully to try to address all of your questions and comments. So to start with, I'd just like to ask each of our illustrious panelists to introduce themselves. Dr. Acosta, we'll start with you. If you would please introduce yourself, your current title, and a little bit about your experience in the world of DEIJ and medical education.
Thank you, Dr. Solis. It's certainly a pleasure and an honor to be here with such an esteemed panel too. So again, for my panelists as well, it's wonderful to be with you. So hi, everybody. My name is David Acosta. I'm a first-generation Latino. My pronouns are he and him. I'm presently the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the Association of American Medical Colleges in Washington, D.C. Been there for about 5 years, but prior to that, I'm a board-certified family physician in training, but I also served as a past Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at both the University of Washington School of Medicine in Seattle, and then later at the University of California, Davis School of Medicine, and at the health system as well there. And so my background really was very helpful in the work that I do with AAMC. I have a staff of about 20, and our role really is to assist our member medical schools and teaching hospitals in anything related to DEI matters, issues, concerns, or any assistance they may need in order to meet some of their accreditation standards or even troubleshooting some of the issues that are there. So Dr. Solis, I will basically give it back to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Acosta. We're happy to have you with us today and look forward to hearing from you. Next, Dr. Durgans.
Thank you, Dr. Solis. My name is Kenneth Durgans. I am Associate Provost for Diversity and Inclusion at Kansas City University. I too am honored to be on this distinguished panel. I am excited and looking forward to the discussion that will follow. As for my background, I have over 40 years in higher education, working mostly at diversity work. I have worked with 3 medical schools, 2 allopathic and 1 osteopathic. So I have an understanding, I think, of both of those environments. I've worked at dental schools. I've worked at schools such as Notre Dame, University of Colorado School of Dental Medicine, IUPUI, Rensselaer Polytechnic, to name a few. And my job here basically is, it's very similar. It's to work with all aspects of the campus to move diversity from the standpoint of admissions, from the standpoint of faculty recruitment, from the standpoint of academic pedagogy, community relations, support of students. So it's very comprehensive in nature. So I'm looking forward to the next few minutes, and thank you again for allowing me to be in this panel.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Durgans. Dr. McDougall, you're up next.
Good afternoon, everyone, and Dr. Solis. My name is Leon McDougall. I'm the Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion at The Ohio State University College of Medicine and Chief Diversity Officer for the Wexner Medical Center. I've been in the diversity and inclusion space in higher education for about 20 years. And I'm also a family physician practicing on the Near East Side of Columbus, Ohio, and look forward to this discussion this afternoon.
Thank you so much. And last, but only by virtue of the alphabet, Dr. Scott, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Veronica Scott. I am currently the Director of Diversity at William Carey University College of Osteopathic Medicine in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Hattiesburg is also my hometown, so I feel very blessed to be able to serve the community that raised me. So I just really started my work with DEI when I was in undergrad. I worked with the diversity office there as part of a work study job, and it just kind of followed me along the way. So I'm not necessarily formally working with the diversity office, but just the things that I saw that needed to get done in the community. I decided to have programming to do those things. So fortunately, when I joined William Carey in 2016, as a classically trained microbiologist, I had no idea in 2020 we were open a diversity office. And so I was given the privilege to plan the office. And so I have an entire team that works with me, an assistant director of diversity, a recruiter who's specifically charged with recruiting students that are underrepresented in medicine, going to HBCUs, and also an administrative assistant. So we're fully funded. We provide programming for our faculty, staff, and administration. And I'm just excited for the conversation that's about to follow today. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you all so much for being willing to share your experiences and your expertise with our audience today. And please, audience, remember, if you have questions, we would love to field those questions at the end of the panel discussion. So please make a note of them, enter in the Q&A, enter into the chat, whatever you're comfortable with. All right, let's go ahead and dive into this conversation. First, let's set the stage. Why does any of this matter? Why did we gather here today to talk specifically about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice and how it relates to undergraduate medical education? How is it related to creating physicians who are able to provide equitable and effective patient care? And I'll just open that to any of you who would like to respond.
So Dr. Solis, I'll go ahead and get started to maybe break the ice here sort of thing too. As a family physician, I think what's really important is that one of the most important tenets of diversity, equity, inclusion is that it really emphasizes the practice of cultural humility. And in my mind, what that really means is really understanding the cultural constructs of what health means to people, what illness means to people, to really come to where they are, because they look at most of our multicultural communities look at their health and diseases using the explanatory model of illness that the cultural anthropologists talked to us a long time ago. And that is, it's through their stories, it's through their lived experiences that really bring them to life when we meet them, together, at the examining table or at the bedside as well. And it's really different for different population groups. We can't put people in boxes, we can't stereotype them. And using cultural humility, we get to really understand and gain a much deeper knowledge of what their experience is, what their interpretation of why they are ill and why it has happened at this particular time, which is so critical, I think, to providing the best comprehensive and culturally responsive care that we can. I think it's been well shown also in many studies now that we have that we know that racial ethnic concordance, but also language concordance plays a significant role in really engaging, our patient populations, especially those that do come from communities of color, to really engage them and bring them in a little bit closer to really understanding their stories, their narratives, because many of us, like myself, who have come from similar communities, we can understand, what the interpretation of why people feel the way that they do. So I'd invite others on the panel also to contribute.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Acosta. Other thoughts on why this matters, why it's important to have these
Yes.
conversations?
So COVID-19 served as a stress test for communities of color, communities limited by access to care related to geography, persons from backgrounds of having disabilities, being from groups who are from LGBTQ communities, and it really provided and highlighted the fact and showed us glaringly that health inequities do in fact exist, and to help remedies these issues of concern, people from those very same
Uh-oh. I think Dr. McDougall is out in the ether somewhere. And we can't hear him. Uh-oh, but he did bring up COVID-19 being a really just brought to the fore, even more so than ever, the inequities that exist in our healthcare system. So if y'all are ready, we can transition to that next question that's related to that, about how the social climate within the last 2 years, including the pandemic, including the murder of George Floyd and other Black men and women, the Black Lives Matter movement and campaign, all of these things came to the forefront of national attention in the past couple of years. So I'd love to hear thoughts on how that changed the DEI landscape and heightened awareness at a national level, and then drilling down how it heightened awareness for medical education, for medical educators, medical students, medical education in general. So I'll name names right here. And there's Dr. McDougall just came back in. Dr. McDougall, we're going to transition. You brought up COVID-19, the pandemic, and how it really highlighted for the entire world to see the inequities that exist in healthcare. So we're glad you're back, and we're going to go ahead and just riff on that for a minute, that idea, and just talk a little bit about the social climate of the past 2 years, including the pandemic, including the murders of George Floyd and other Black men and women, the Black Lives Matter movement, how all of that has changed the DEI landscape at the national level, as well as heightened awareness. So I'll call on Dr. Scott, if you don't mind, if you want to throw your hat in the ring on that one, we'll get that conversation going.
Sure. Well, on a national level, when we saw the murder of George Floyd, it kept being replayed over and over in the media, even to the point of traumatization of the Black community.
Mm-hmm.
But for the first time in history, everyone had a front row seat, because we had the COVID-19, the pandemic going on. So nobody could go anywhere. Everybody was on lockdown. And so everybody is watching this over and over. And so it heightened awareness. And some people actually thought racism was over somehow. It was a thing of the past. It let you know that it's still very much alive and present to those that didn't realize it. And to our question earlier about DEI, why we still have to have these conversations, is because we have to let people know that these things still matter. If we stop having conversations, then we won't progress forward. We will only go backward. And we can see, what that has done in the past and what it's currently doing. So we still have to advance these initiatives. We still have to have the conversations about why it's important. Our students know it's important. They want to be seen. They want to be heard on campus. They want to feel like they have a place. So for the first time after, George Floyd, everything that happened with the Black Lives Matter movement, our students demanded change. They demanded inactive diversity offices to stand up and actually do something, to put out statements, to educate. And so they really demand what they want, and they won't accept anything less. So much so that, if someone is not being active on their campus, that comes a conversation of something that they have in their, study groups, or their those online student organizations where they have their little group chats and everything. They're talking about it. Students are talking about what campuses have DEI initiatives and what campuses don't. That's becoming a major deciding factor to where they want to apply to schools. I have been called in on interviews that I didn't participate in because they wanted to hear from the DEI office. And so I've talked to candidates because this is a major deciding factor of where they want to go to school, because they want to feel like their voices are heard. They want to feel included. And if schools can't provide that, then they will go elsewhere. And this will greatly impact numbers going ahead as far as enrollment is concerned. We need to keep having these conversations because, we want to train these physicians who will go back and serve the communities that they came from. And to Dr. Acosta's point earlier, communities of color are more likely to trust people who look like them in treating them. And so we don't have doctors to service them to meet those healthcare needs. We end up with a deficit. And so that's why we still have to have the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Scott. Other thoughts, Dr. Durgans? I think I just saw on you.
Yes, I'll jump in here too to sort of follow up and that make the transition from the national level a little bit more to the campus level, because I think that Dr. Scott has it totally right when she talked about the reawakening or the awakening of student power. I go back to the 60s and 70s as I was growing up. This reminds me of the time that I was in school when we came through and we pushed and things like that. But this student group, I think, has even been more effective. You're seeing on campuses now, and I talk to my colleagues across the country, particularly, I think important, especially in the curriculum, because this is an area that to me had been void of a lot of focus in diversity for quite some time, or really for the history. And being able to actually teach the next generation things that weren't taught before, I think is important. I think the students know it's important. They're coming back and telling us that, hey, this is missing. We had an incident here where some students they had gone through the class in skincare diagnosis, and they went out, did some work and said, hey, we don't feel comfortable being able to do this. We don't know, we weren't taught how to diagnose the various hues of skin color. We taught our faculty, there was a seminar series that happened to be going on at this time nationally. We hooked our faculty up to that. What we found is that they weren't taught that, so they didn't have the wherewithal to be able to teach it. So, these are things I think that when we talk about the future, particularly in a few minutes, are going to be very, very important aspects of the change that is needed to be able to create an educational system that will prepare our students for the next 30, 40, 50, 100 years.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Durgans. As a medical educator myself, I absolutely have been seeing the changes that our learners have been demanding when it comes to the curriculum, particularly, as you were saying, in images, right? Not just dermatology either. I'm here at osteopathic medical school, University of the Incarnate Word School of Osteopathic Medicine, and our docs, our clinical skills area, they are now, the faculty now are learning how to talk to like markers, like skin markers and flushing and things like that, and what that looks like on different skin hues, and yeah, our faculty are like, oh, I need to do research. Like, it's really, to their credit, has really lit a fire under them too, to say like, yeah, we need to step up our game as well because our students are demanding this. And frankly, it's the right thing to do, right? It's high time. It's the right thing to do. So yeah.
May I add on to
Of
this
course, please.
conversation? So it focused national attention on algorithms, on, for example, kidney filtration rate. So, and for decades, the GFR for white and Black people differed. So what does that mean? If you had a lower GFR and Black, that was considered normal. And so one would be delayed referral to a nephrologist. One would be delayed for consideration for kidney referral for dialysis. So if you're diagnosed later, and we know that it takes longer for Black people to even receive a transplant once they're on the list, it just lends itself to a built-in, baked-in inequity. And so our student leadership here help us to work with our nephrologist, and this past February, the GFR formula was changed and did not take into consideration race. So this is February of 2022 that relook at these race-based standards. I don't think would have happened if it had not been for the pandemic and the awakening and relook at why are we using race for these various algorithms. Now we're looking at pulmonary function test. Now we're looking at vaginal birth after C-section. There's some other baked in inequities in the way we do things. So yes, that's what's happening at the national level. Now we need to bring that to the local level. And I apologize. I checked my internet speed and everything before this, and it's throwing me off a bit. So then I'm seeing this report on the internet regarding stability of the transmission. But yes, from the national level, now we as educators and working with our students are bringing this to our local levels.
Yeah.
Dr. Solis, if I could just add one more thing that we haven't mentioned yet, and that is, I think, the racial reckoning that we've all have been going through, we were starting to see, not only just our medical schools, our teaching hospitals, but also associations recognizing and taking a deeper look, looking in the mirror at ourselves to really investigate what our racist past was. And medicine has a racist past, including our association, AAMC does, as well as others that have actually stepped forward in saying that we've recognized it, now it's time for us to reconcile it. And I think what it really brought to the surface for the first time, and this is after doing this work 20 years plus, as my other colleagues would also say, this is probably the first time that I can ever remember that we've had this much of a deep dive into, understanding race and racism and how it impacts us. And this is the first time that I can remember we're actually openly talking about how structural racism has been embedded in our infrastructure and our governance, in our processes, our policies that are embedded in both of our higher education schools and health profession schools, and how it manifests. And now we're starting to discover even those subtle manifestations that people wouldn't necessarily think that was racism because we've become so complacent. It's been so embedded with that white racial frame that ultimately we are now starting to essentially pay attention, do that deeper dive and saying, something, some of these subtle manifestations are appearing in our admissions enrollment, in our hiring practices, in our promotion practices, that we need to wake up and we need to really address this. And how do we deconstruct some of these policies, processes, but even some of the traditions that we've had in our institutions and kept to sustain the status quo, which means to sustain these racial equity and gender inequities that are there. And so I'm excited, even though there's lots of things that are hitting us, the reality, this is the first time where we're actually finding a little empowerment in our voices. And again, there's nothing like our students that really spur us and catalyze us on, as mentioned by my colleagues today too.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. One of the things that I've been reflecting on a lot lately is the harm of the status quo, right? The harm of just accepting things as they are because that's how it's always been, right? As a white woman, I am in the position where I could just blithely go about my life and accept the status quo because I don't have to think about it if I don't want to, right? And I keep thinking about like that kind of attitude times however many white folk there are, right? And the harm that just being accepting of the status quo has done and is still doing. So I'm glad to hear a lot of the rest of you are thinking along those same lines as well. And just how do we, again, alongside our students, they're the ones that are shaking things up for us, right? And so how do we continue on that? So yeah, thank you all.
Before we move on, can I offer one
Absolutely.
other suggestion too? And it's more of a personal one. And I think that for me, in this whole sphere and all the things that have happened, I think it also sort of re-energized what I would call my own courage to be bolder. And sometimes, you know, you work in this environment and you feel like most of the things that you do, you have to do in a stealth manner. And you know, so to be effective. But I think in the last couple of years, it's the movement, the students, the excitement. They've been about energized, I think, myself and a lot of other professionals, you know, to say a little bit more about what's on our mind, not in a crass way or anything like that, but in a way that, you know, we think, you know, really saying your opinion so that people can see that there are different ways to look at things. And you know, and always try to make sure that it is, you know, is laced with data and all that kind of stuff, so that, you know, that's there. But I know I'm bolder and more courageous again. I feel more like myself in the 70s sometimes, you know, as a result of the last couple of years.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to follow up on what Dr. Durgan just stated. So Dr. Adam Malam published an article about seminal race events and the response of the various institutions. And those institutions that provided response in public to address those seminal race events, such as the George Floyd murder, there were less problems with related to mood disorders like depression among the Black students. So it directly speaks to having that voice and having that institutional leadership to speak to the times that we are in. So thanks so much, Dr. Durgan, for bringing that important point up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Wonderful, wonderful conversation. Thank you all. And yeah, I feel the same way. I think we all do. Our students are emboldening us in wonderful ways. And that's exciting. That is very exciting. So when we're thinking, when we talk about things that are exciting, but perhaps daunting, DEI strategy plans can feel that way sometimes. Creating a strategy for DEI justice, we know it's necessary, but it's also such a challenge. And a challenge in many ways. Just we want to get it right, and we also maybe will experience some roadblocks in our institutions and things like that perhaps stop us from being as bold perhaps as we would like to be. So I'm just curious about obstacles that y'all have faced when you think about creating an organization that is frankly a racial and social equity and justice organization. What obstacles have you faced, and how have you worked to overcome those?
I can
Go ahead.
I can start on this. So our medical school, we have about 205 students in each class, so over 800 medical students. Then for GME, over 800 residents and fellows, and then about 2,400 faculty. So one of the barriers just includes the sheer number of faculty and learners we have to engage. So one of the ways, so what we did is, so each of our departments, now 27 departments, each one has a vice chair for DEI. And I meet with them monthly and sharing best practices, what I learned from the AAMC. And we've also asked those vice chairs to join the AAMC group on diversity and inclusion, so they can hear directly from Dr. Acosta and the great work being done. So building out this work across each department, that's an approach that we've taken, and it's time consuming. We're also building out our diversity office. So now we're bringing in assistant dean for learner diversity, assistant dean for faculty diversity, and a staff lead along with a outreach and engagement coordinator, then those 27 vice chairs. So more people are needed. And also regarding this effort, it should be multiracial, multi-diversity, including intersectionality as a consideration. So this should not just be left up to persons from marginalized groups. All hands on deck are needed.
I'll start off with the amen. And because and I'll say this too, that I've been fortunate where I'm at, where at KCU, I have a very supportive environment. So it's been surprisingly, I wouldn't say easy, but it hasn't been difficult. I think it's been a lot of openness, and perhaps again it's because I came right before COVID hit and then George Floyd. But I think traditionally some of the things that have been roadblocks are going to be lack of commitment from the senior team. A lot of times beyond lack of commitment, it's just lack of knowing what to do. And so, we talked about that earlier about things like curriculum. So, and then you could take that to the admissions, if you don't know where to go, to find the people, then that's going to be difficult. To create an environment where people see people that look like them is very important in that, in that regard too. I also want to, expand it beyond just the, race and ethnicity thing, and get into, the LGBTQ issues, trans issues, being able to listen to the various, groups. I think is a big part of the lessons that a lot of us have learned on how to be successful. Who better to teach you how to be successful than the people who, as long as you have a trust in that and understand that they're there as a student or as a faculty member, but particularly as a student, to get their education. So you're not overworking them in that process. Yeah. I think lastly, that, as a diversity person, my goal is, I think, to work with people to help them be better at what they do. So I'm not trying to recreate being in charge of the curriculum, but I'm working with the people who put together the curriculum. I am not trying to, recreate admissions, but I'm working with the people who put together admissions and trying to bring the expertise that I think I have, and in the realm of being successful in all these environmental endeavors.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, almost that consultative role. Yeah, Dr. Acosta, you had a
Yeah,
hand.
and I would just add again, I think, it's the old adage that you have to make visible what's invisible to people. And when you talk about those obstacles, many people don't see what we see because we have different lenses that we wear, so to speak. I call the DEI specs that we wear, sort of thing. And what I'm really talking about, in order to get people's attention and get that engagement, you do have to assess your culture and your climate. And there's many good products that are out there to use to really understand what's the lived experiences of people that are actually in the trenches, that are experiencing what that learning and workspace environment is about. Because again, if you're finding a toxic learning and workplace environment, then the people need to see that. And our leaders, I believe, I don't think most of our leaders are bad people. They want to know, but so frequently the people that report to them don't let them know the truth, right? Because they're fearful of the judgment or repercussion or retribution that may create. So I think it starts there. What are people's true lived experiences, and all the different factions, and not just the students, but includes also in the faculty, but not just the faculty either, but also staff. Staff are very frequently the very first element of exchange with people who really see it, but sometimes don't have the voice or empowered to basically share what they see in their trench, especially people that have historically been there for quite some time that we can learn a lot from. So I think making visible what's really true, is going to be really impactful to really kind of affect that change, because it's not only just identifying the badness, but also more importantly, if you ask the people in the trench that are suffering these and more of that, and you ask them, what kind of solutions do you think that would help you given where you are? Most of them already have answers, but they've never been asked that. And so I think I think that will inform our work, but also help engage even our senior leadership to really come down to that level, to really understand. It's kind of put your hierarchical badge at the table, right? Or at the door, leave it at the door, but let's have a conversation about what we're really experiencing with the hope that, we all want excellence. We all want a place where it's the most thriving environment where to work and also a thriving environment to learn. So again, I think it also has to start there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to add to that if I could,
Of course.
because, sometimes when we face obstacles, it can be that, some people feel left out of the whole DEI justice perspective. They may feel that it's just for the marginalized communities, like my colleague spoke about, that it's not for them. And a big part of this is education. Let them know like, hey, this is about everybody. We need everybody included in this work. This is just not for one particular spectrum. So I think sometimes you get pushback from people because they don't see the benefit of it for themselves. And they actually start to feel marginalized because they say, well, they have these programs for other people, but not for me. To let everyone know that this is a space where everyone can be in. It's part of education. And I would just like to put this out to encourage people, if you're thinking about starting a diversity office, or maybe this is some of your concern, there's always going to be pushback. There's always going to be obstacles. But what are you going to do in response to those obstacles? The work has to continue. So for instance, I've spoken to you a little bit about this, Dr. Solis, but, on my campus, there's a lot of conversations that I have to have with university administrators, with lawyers. I'm more so like Dr. Durgans. I get fired up. My students get fired up. I'm like, okay, hey, let's do this. And we're getting really excited about it. And at the same time, I'm learning the administrative part of it too, where I know that the administrators are looking out for the sake of the university. And so I have to play both roles. Like I have to kind of calm our students down, like, hey, we're working on it, but change may not come as fast as you want it to. But this is in play. And so I just think, having those conversations of administrators or lawyers, letting them know why DEI and justice initiatives are important, why we're working on this, having that open and honest conversation with, students, staff, administrators, whoever needs to hear it. Making sure you're open to having those conversations. And if they're not open to hear it, then keep working. There's other things that you can do within your whole strategic plan or your realm of your office. So for instance, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but there's a lot of things that we want to do with programming, so to speak. But we also have recruitment initiatives. And so for this year, we focused on our recruitment initiatives, not necessarily going to HBCUs, targeting those that are underrepresented in medicine, even though that is important, but we start to have the conversation of when do they actually make the decision to go to med school. And that's, as far back as primary school. So we work with primary students, middle school students, high school students. So we have a presence on campus. So we're always being active within the community at the same time, accomplishing those goals and still facing those obstacles. So my point is, you just don't quit. Not that any of my colleagues said that. I don't want to make that plain, but I just want to be honest about the obstacles that you face. And sometimes that is very discouraging. And sometimes you don't know how to go about the leadership of your office if you're just focused on one thing. You have to be focused in a wide variety of things and have a conversation about different things that you can continue to do to be productive within the office. So I wanted to put that out to encourage people that, hey, you're going to face obstacles. It's going to happen from administrators. But just making sure you're open to having those conversations, making sure you're open to continue to do the work, no matter what. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I like the idea of diversifying the work we do in our diversity offices, right? Like there's always work to be done. Sometimes you can't approach something, in my experience, you can't approach it head on. So you find kind of like, let's go around the corner and approach it that way, right? And always with student backing around here, I know if our learners say, we need this, administrators and other powers that be are going to say, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, right? Yeah. Other thoughts on that before we move to our next?
Just one other thought, Dr. Solis, and that is, one of our jobs as chief diversity officers, I believe, is that we're translators. And what I mean by that is we have to speak many languages. In the old days, we used to basically did this because this is the right thing to do. But I think that doesn't work these days now. I think that still drives us. That's still in our heart and soul. That keeps us honest. But the reality is that we have to become these experts in speaking different languages so that if I really want to drive something, if I want to move something forward and affect change, the reality is the conversation I have with my CFO is going to be different than I may have with my department chairs. It may be different than I have with my CEO. And I have to be able to kind of shift that language to really understand what matters to them, what keeps them up at night. And I think our best CDIOs know that, in the sense of how can they translate our DEI work to be a solution for something that keeps them up at night. But it's so important to figure out what that is and have developed that relationship with those particular leaders in the C-suite to find out what keeps you up at night and how can we come and compromise and come to the middle of this and begin negotiating. Because again, we're here to make your job a little bit easier, but also more important so that the enterprise maintains its excellence and we provide continuous excellent care. And this is maybe another way that you may have not thought about that we could use DEI efforts in order to meet and answer some of the solutions, not be the entire solution, but at least be part of what the answer that they may be looking for that they haven't even considered.
Let me add just a little bit to follow up on what Dr. Acosta said too, because I think I mentioned it like earlier, the importance of a commitment from the top, because the accountability and the things that you're able to do really and how really difficult your job will be is predicated on the commitment that comes from the top, from the board of trustees and your mission statements. That's key. And being able to hold people accountable to that is key as well. If that's not out there, then you're kind of flailing and you're depending on the goodwill of somebody more so than both the goodwill and a structure of accountability. So, I want to add that as well. That could never be taken off the table in the work that we do.
Yeah.
And even Kenneth, the accountability at the board level as well. They have to hold themselves accountable for this because again, it bubbles down and reaches down, and that talk is cheap.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you translate that into, actions down the line?
Yeah, thank you. That gives me a bit of a different perspective. I'll admit to getting frustrated sometimes, and the work doesn't move fast enough for me, for sure. So I get where our students are coming from. To me, like, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice is the right thing to do. It is the moral and ethical thing to do. And I look around me and go, why isn't that enough for everyone? But it's a perspective, right? It's a perspective change. And I do think someone said earlier something about, like, we're also in the business of why. Why is this important to my CFO? Why is this important to my dean at all these different levels, right? Why should our university president, how can DEIJ help him meet his goals, right? And so when I think of it that way, it broadens my own perspective. So thank you for that. I'd now like us to transition just a bit into looking at the future. So I we gave our audience, we gave our panelists some homework and asked them to vision for us a little bit and to consider the DEI landscape or the state of DEI over the next 10 years, what shifts they anticipate, what changes might be happening. So I'm interested to hear from all of you sort of at a national level, what you think that DEI landscape will look like over the next 10 years. Excuse me. And then drilling it down into where we all live in medical education. So, so I just open the floor again, whoever wants to kick off this conversation.
Okay, I can start. So uplifting allyship and upstandard training will become the norm, and accrediting bodies such as LCME and ACGME, I anticipate that this will be a requirement. Lifting up allyship so much so that persons from marginalized groups don't always feel as though they have to be the first person to raise their hand or to address a microaggression that occurs. So we want to uplift allyship, improve the learning environment. And what does that do? It allows everyone to thrive and to advance our tripartite mission. So that's one thing I anticipate happening in the future.
I'm gonna try two things in the future. And one is kind of like connection between the future and the past. And I think we're going to still have to deal with this affirmative action issue.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We have to be real about the state we're in with respect to our Supreme Court. There are some really, really big cases that are sitting that will be decided, I believe, in this next iteration of communication from the Supreme Court early next year. So, strategies to be able to deal with the kinds of decisions that are coming out are still going to be a very important thing. And then kind of moving back a little bit more specifically to healthcare, and I'm going to focus a little bit more on the educational piece. And I'm going to sort of, Dr. McDougall, you kind of started this, and I'm going to raise this up right here. Medical algorithms have a race problem article. I think your point earlier is that a lot of the things that we're doing in research are going to have to really, really be translated into our pedagogies in the next 10 years, or we'll have another generation of missed opportunities. And I think that is so important to be able to have more data from which to use in the classroom to actually impact the way practitioners will be focusing in the future. This is a key. I think the next 10 years are very key in that area. And I'd like to see us do a lot of focus on that with organizations such as AAMC, such as AACOM, step up to the plate and actually encourage more research, get involved in that aspect. And then, the type of research that is translational to the classroom. I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Durgans. Absolutely. Dr. Scott, Dr. Acosta?
I'll just piggyback on what has been said as well. I think it's going to happen sooner than 10 years. We're already there, and especially what Dr. Durgans brought up is so important us to pay attention to, because DEI is already changing in front of our eyes once again. I feel we're going back to the late 50s, with some of the things that have come past. But I think the DEI landscape is strongly going to depend on the politics at both the federal level, but even more importantly at the state level, looking at what's going on right now. And I think it's just a reflection of what's coming down the pike and on the horizon. We've been preparing for this, but I think it's clearly the ideology from people that are in positions of power that are making decisions and creating policy is really going to depend on the outcomes inflicted by some of the laws that are coming out and in place. For example, not only the SCOTUS decision on the affirmative action, that's minor in comparison, because we've been there before. Yeah. We've done this before. history does repeat itself, and we got to pay attention to the lessons learned. Number two, I think about the anti-CRT movements, anti-DEI initiatives that are not only happening in the health professions and higher education, it's down through K through 12 that we have to really pay attention to this sort of thing. The interference on physician-patient relationship and how physicians are practicing, any healthcare providers are practicing medicine. That's scary enough as it is, because again, who's going to be impacted the most is going to be our patients, sort of thing, as we come up against things such as the anti-abortion movements, the anti-gender affirming care movements, the abolishing trans care. These are all issues that are getting in the way of that we've held so holy, so to speak, that don't disrupt the relationship between us and how we take care of patients, sorts of stuff. But those are things that are very real. Does DEI have anything to play with it? The answer is yeah, because the communities that we care about, the marginalized populations, the vulnerable populations, are going to be the most impacted by the decisions that are made at that particular level. So, I think this is a time that ultimately, if I were to dream, what would I hope to see in 10 years, so to speak? My hope is that we have different leaders in positions of power. We've been waiting for years to create leadership academies, to enhance our leaders of color, to get them at the table, to inflict change and impart change and be transformative leaders. 10 years, my hope is that's going to happen. We're going to see, since the demographics are going to be changing by 2035, that we've even have done that before the 10 years are out. Number two, I think redefining meritocracy is going to be a critical space because that is so archaic. And basically that keeps people out. It keeps the status quo operating and sustains those racial and ethnic and gender inequities that are in place. And we just got to change how meritocracy is defined. When I think about some of the infrastructures in some of our campuses, where you have a body known as the Faculty Senate, who basically the only people who can vote on any faculty matters is if you have tenure. Well, we know who's involved in that decision making, and more importantly, who's not at that table. And the people who don't have tenure, which makes up a larger body of the faculty, known as in some campuses known as the Federation, have absolutely no voting power at all. When I think about what COVID has taught us and working from home remotely and how productive we can be, it's archaic. We have to redefine meritocracy and come to the 21st century, because we have to redefine what the roles that especially our women faculty had to take on because of COVID. They were now not only taking care of their families and expected to, but they were taking care of their elderly parents as well. And that was the expectations. At the same time that they were supposed to develop all the scholarly work that's there. And so we need to really change that meter, for them, so we don't lose faculty. We already have a great resignation going on, but how do we maintain faculty, to basically come to where they're at, and get away from time constraint meritocracy to more competency-based meritocracy.
Yeah.
I'm dreaming here, Leon, I know, but it's good.
I love the dreams. We have to dream it before we can start working towards it, right? We have to visualize it and even to get to step one to making something happen. So yeah, thank you for those dreams. Dr. Scott, I'll throw it over to you. Any thoughts about the next 10 years?
Yeah, so this was a hard question for me to answer on the homework assignment. So I do agree with my colleagues. Like I envision great things for DEIJ in the future. The issue is, how much work are we going to put into it? The energy, the effort, those laws, the people who are in power, in place, are they going to put the work into it? And I don't know if you guys have felt this way, but I felt, we talked about what happened with the murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter movement, but it seems like in recent months, this energy has died down. People have returned to a state of normalcy, and it seems like back to some issue of complacency. And so how are we going to keep it fired up? How are we going to keep going? And it's all about the energy that, we're putting into these initiatives to keep it happening, without, God forbid, another terrible incidents happening. When these incidents happen, then everybody gets fired up for a while, and we stand up and we protest and we march, and, we go to get laws and votes and everything, but then it just dies down. So what are we going to do to keep that momentum going without incident happening? And that's the bigger question. That's the harder question, at least for me to answer. Because, if people don't see it happening in front of their eyes, they're least likely to make a move about it. But we should still keep it going. Dr. McDougall, I'm sorry.
So I'd like to speak to that. So it needs to be built into the strategic plan and goals set forth that will be tracked over a 5-year period. It needs to be integrated within our daily work. And as I spoke to earlier about building out infrastructure to support this increase in demand. So, for example, for our College of Medicine in the strategic plan, there's a DEI pillar and there's a health equity pillar. We also have an anti-racism action plan for the university, the medical center, and the College of Medicine that complement each other. So those are just a few ways and the funding associated with those initiatives.
But Dr. McDougall, I agree. I'm also just talking about it as from a national standpoint. We have to keep that energy. But as I spoke to before, we got to keep the work going where we are. And so that speaks to what we're doing with our strategic plan, and always, even though there are obstacles, continue to work, continue to fulfill out what we have in those plans. But as far as what is going to advance in the future, I'm saying I don't think I can necessarily speak to that. I can only speak to the energy and effort that I'm giving. And I think each of us needs to be given some form of effort. And that's my ultimate point.
Yeah, agreed.
And Dr. Scott, but I would also suggest, again, as an association that works with also with their constituents as well, what we know when we're on Capitol Hill is that people's lived experiences and stories matter to them. It's not about what policies you have and what things want to change. The more stories that they hear from people in the trench that ultimately is suffering from some of these inequities, those will get translated, because it wouldn't surprise you to know that, again, legislators are not in that trench. They're not at the table. They don't see what's going on, and they rely on their interns and other lobbyists to really inform them that's there. And so we play a huge part, meaning that all of our campuses, all of our stories from our faculty, our administrators as well, need to get used to basically using their voice to help have the associations represent them, or we basically convene particular meetings with the key stakeholders to affect that change, because that's what works. Where we've seen the most policy change make a big difference is that when people start responding back with some of those personal atrocities that they have and tragedies that they have suffered because of some of the legislative moves moving forward. So,
and can I just add briefly, in building our family, it should also include our professional organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So most recently, I was president of the National Medical Association. I had more freedom, I think, to really speak, or more opportunity on a national stage to speak to some of these issues, and really promoted that partnership with local societies with the respective medical schools. So I would recommend that medical schools continue to support membership in professional organizations such as the Association of American Indian Physicians, the National Hispanic Medical Association, the National Council on Asian and Pacific Islanders, National Medical Association, National Pharmacy Association, National Black Nurses Association, because we're all working together. And so it creates even more synergy. So we have these outside organizations speaking to our leadership also to help continue with that momentum and urgency.
Yeah, thank you all so much. What a great conversation. I'd like to start, if we could, for our moderators, if you would like to just jump in and start feeding us, our panelists, some questions from the audience. I think we'd love to spend some time with that.
So
Sure,
I'll
I'd
go
be-
ahead. I'll go ahead. We have our first question from Jessica DiNazio. I'm sorry if I messed up your name. Since medicine has historically had systemic racism built into it, unfortunately, how we teach also has built it in. As faculty, we are trying to find ways to break this pattern. For example, finding photos of different skin tones, simulation having different skin tones for task trainers, recruiting diverse faculty. My question is, what resources are there for photos for different skin tones for OMT? Textbooks have rarely had anyone other than Caucasian as patients, but as doctors. Any resources would be fantastic.
There actually is a series, the one that I was talking about, I have it saved on my, what is it on my, well, I have it saved. And I could definitely forward it to you if I had the information, but it was a video series that was put together by, in conjunction with the Journal of New England Journal of Medicine. And there was a National Black Dermatology group. It's excellent. It's a 4-part, as I said, 4-part series, and it goes through in depth. And then you could also find, I'm sure, with connecting with the organization and put it together, I'm sure you get more in-depth information, but it's definitely there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just answer it by, if they just Google Atlas of Dark Skin, which I just did right now.
Okay.
There's probably about 8 books that are out there that specifically address that issue that are actually really good in that sense. As well as if you contact also the Association of the Dermatological Society, they also have a big movement right now to be able to do that. An online source is called Visual Diagnosis, which is brand new. It's been around for the last 5-6 years or so, but they've really stepped up and also answered that as well. But great resources as well.
The Skin of Color
Okay.
Association is another one. I think that within the Dermatology Association that has lots of
Yep.
really great resources.
Our next question
May I
is,
just add to that also?
okay.
One of our students advocated for, and we were able to purchase in our clinical skills lab a mannequin, CPR mannequin with dark skin, because finding vein access and so on is different.
Difficult.
So that's also available.
Thank you for that, Dr. McDougall. Anybody else before I move to the next question?
And I just responded to the question. I just gave a resource for an atlas that I recommend for our faculty. So they have a hard text copy of it. I don't think it's online, but it's a hard text copy. I did put that in the chat.
All right, thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. Our next question, pipeline programs in school is not enough in the face of institutional racism. How do you foster the need for change, the need for a metric of effective matriculation and support of students they excel? How do you foster the need for change when there's known institutional racism?
Could you read that one more time?
Absolutely. Pipeline programs in school is not enough in the face of institutional racism. How do you foster the need for change? There's a need of effective matriculation and support of students they excel. How do you foster the need for change when there's known institutional racism?
There's known institutional racism.
So
Yeah.
I
Yes.
start
So-
with that.
Mhm.
One method is benchmarking with AAMC data, and when having discussions with leadership, focus on those units that are doing relatively well. And we want to build bridges for change management. There's this book called Switch: How to Change When Change is Hard. There's always some unit that's doing relatively well. And in presenting that case, want to speak to the heart, but not alienate people. So one of my mottos is praise in public, counsel in private. So when we're in these big meetings, I'm going to uplift the cardiology department. I'm going to uplift surgery in their work. I'm going to uplift pediatrics. And so then it becomes, well, they're doing that. They're doing relatively well. Why can't we do that? So that's one pathway.
And Robert, I'll answer it maybe in a little different way. There's some examples of pipeline programs in providing the students at that early stage, with the skills that they need of how to deal with institutional racism when they find it. We can't assume that people know how to do that, even how to dialogue about racism and race when you encounter it. And so there are many good examples out there, but I would start with thinking about utilizing the framework called restorative justice practice. There's an example at UC Davis where I used to be that ultimately has used restorative justice as a framework to teach our young pathway students basically how to dialogue about racism, right? How to deal with racism, but more importantly, how do we dialogue with each other? How do you create these particular building communities in which you can basically discuss the undiscussables? Because that takes a skill set of knowing how to do that. Even it starts with how to listen, how to compromise, how to discuss, and do it in a meaningful way. So I think restorative justice practices that I see in some of these pathway programs that have done it would be really good. So I would think about a model for people to look at is UC Davis and the racial tension circles that they run using this particular model. They started this way back in the time after George Floyd murders because students really felt that they didn't have a space, a brave space enough to be able to discuss this. But they also learned that they also didn't have a lot of the skill sets that they wish that they had to dialogue about this. But it made them stronger, empowered them more so that when they did encounter it, even when they went back to their campus after the Pro Pipeline program was done, basically they found that they could build on some of that as well. And some of the students even built and started their own restorative justice practice circles at home when they got there.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything to say before we move to the next question? All right, appreciate your answers. The next question, in case you, well, the question is it better to integrate health equity and DEIJ topics throughout other areas in curriculum, or to have standalone discussions / lectures which focus on just health equity and DEIJ? Because the school can control curriculum, students are more of a captive audience. Has it been the second question, has it been more challenging to introduce DEIJ to faculty and staff, or is it harder to require such an engagement?
I'm a fan of both.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of, that it has to be integrated. I mean, that's an imperative, and I think it also has to be talked about in its own right. And I think you can do both. Working with the faculty planning group here, we've been able to embed it in the curriculum for all in all the programs actually that are on campus, our dental school, our med school, and our Psych B program. And that's your captive audience right there. That's the group that can't opt out, because when you do things outside, a lot of times they don't have the requirement structure to bring the students, particularly students who really, really, really need it, to the table. So I'm a fan of both. Yeah, I'll stop there. I see Dr. Madugal.
In addition to that, with our curriculum review, we're using a bias checklist by Dr. Amy Caruso Brown. So that's we're undergoing that now to look at the curriculum to make that a curriculum that lends itself to being anti-bias in our education and expanding health equity and anti-racism content in our curriculum.
I would just add, I think it's also important for our students to get out into the community. There are many community agencies and organizations that are actually putting this to action. And it's really important to them as they become our future healthcare providers that they really understand that the community is very vested in this. And this is not about lectures anymore. This is about watching and seeing how it happens next to them and seeing how even the community responds to some of their efforts. Because as I've mentioned before, the reality, the community frequently has, the solutions. And this just provides students that emphasis on how important it is as a future practitioner to really engage and work with your community, because they may have those solutions that will help you to get to this point of health equity as well. So I think it's practiced out there. It's really important for them to have some hands-on experiences in the community.
Let me try one more suggestion. Just Dr. Acosta kind of reminded me too, is that bring the community to your school as well. Because a lot of ours, like we're gated. I mean, we're in a community that is pretty diverse, very diverse, lower socioeconomics and such, but we're gated. And so I think it's important to bridge those gaps both ways so that people feel comfortable coming on. And we do bring a lot of folks on, as well as students going out. That sends, I think, the right message as well.
Yeah, I would even add is involve them in your curriculum development, involve them early on.
Yeah.
One of the questions I remember when I was at the University of Washington that worked really well, that made me tear up my script, was going out and asking the community, you've been exposed to our students, you've been exposed to our faculty, you've been exposed to our doctors. If you had a chance to create a curriculum, what would you want them to learn? And what was amazing about what they came up with, and some of these things we kind of validated some of the things, but there are many more things in which really added to making our curriculum a lot more robust because it came directly from them as well. And then empowered them as well because they got more invested, wanted to serve on panels, wanted to serve as that agency you went to go visit, sort of the thing for your practicums, that sort of thing too.
Thank you. And I think this will be our last question. How do you address students and faculty that report feeling alienated when we try to discuss and update LGBTQIA+ issues in medicine because it doesn't align with their morals? I think that's a fantastic way to end this conversation. That's a fantastic question.
Can you repeat that one more time? Sorry.
How do you address students and faculty that report feeling alienated when we try to discuss and update LGBTQIA issues in medicine because it doesn't align with their morals? I'm assuming with other people's morals, such as curriculum development, administrators, so on and so forth.
I will make a comment. I know I'm the moderator, but
No,
thoughts and experience. So one way that I do this is that I do remind our students and faculty that LGBTQ+ people are patients as well, and that they are human beings as well of equal value and worthy of respect and dignity as myself, themselves, anyone else. And for me, when I approach it that way, just with that gentle reminder that first and foremost, they're humans and patients, and it's our duty to treat. And so our physician's duty to treat. And that's how I approach it. Again, it takes some gentle, some gentle words and pushes in that direction, but certainly just a reminder of the humanity of every single person is, for most of the faculty and students I work with, is like, oh yeah, you're right. That's like, it serves as a good reminder.
I'd say one of the things that we've engaged in, and we've had a lot of these conversations on campus, is really working on creating an environment that when you have a discussion, that everybody's opinion is valued. And then in an academic unit, thinking about the purpose of academics is that we are here to learn different ideas, and these ideas should be predicated on something, making that one of a big part of the criteria. So when we're having discussions, no disrespect. Well, I shouldn't say that, but Fox News is not that's not the resource. The resource is something that is more in the realm of, something that you would read from a study or something like that, so that, you have that commonality of focus. Then we're not dealing with people's feelings and opinions as much, even though you can't separate them necessarily. But in those discussions, reminding people that this is an academic institution. That's what we do at academic institutions, is discuss difficult things. And we discuss them in the classroom this way, and in our conversations, we can discuss them in this way too.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I'm gonna have to stop us there. We are at time. I do want to mention, we know that we didn't get to all the questions. However, we are in the process of getting those questions downloaded because we think that there is fodder there for future fireside chats. Really great questions. So that we will be working on that. We're also working on, I've been furiously taking notes of resources that our panelists have mentioned, and we will put together a resource list that we will send out to everyone who registered for this session, in the hopes that that will answer some questions for you and help you to continue moving forward in the hard work that you're doing. So thank you all for joining us today. Again, this is just our very first fireside chat. We look forward to more. We look forward to, as a sort of AACOM representative, we look forward to continuing our partnership with AACOM in this area. So I hope you'll watch your inbox for future events. Panelists, thank you. You are invaluable. The work you do, the humans you are invaluable. And I just appreciate each and every one of you, and honored that you took part in this event. So thank you. To, again, the support folks, thank you all so much. Dr. Walker, thank you for moderating our Q&A session. Always great to see you online. And I just want to say happy holidays to everyone who celebrates, and to everyone, I just wish you a happy, healthy, and productive 2023. Thank you.